Good afternoon and welcome to Capital Improvement Projects for Community Associations. My name is Tim O'Keefe, an Executive Director and Partner with KW Property Management and Consulting, and I will serve as the moderator of today's program. We had 150 registrants for today's event, so clearly projects in community associations is a very popular topic. Our goal today is to educate you on projects and give you insight that you can share with your fellow board members and owners. We are very pleased that today's event is sponsored by Brightview, the nation's leading commercial landscaping company that provides professional landscape services. Brightview's teams create and maintain beautiful, safe outdoor environments for residential communities just like yours. Their services include landscaping, fertilization, pest control, irrigation services, mulch, tree care, and sport turf. Please feel free to reach out to Beth Rappaport, the Business Development Executive for Brightview in our market. Beth is always happy to provide a no-stress quotation for any size project. For those of you that joined us today, you will receive a $10 Starbucks gift card, compliments of Brightview and KW Property Management. The gift card will be sent to you via email to the email address that you used to register for today's webinar. Be sure to check your spam folder in a few days if you don't receive your gift card. Beth, we all thank you and Brightview for sponsoring the Starbucks gift card. KW Property Management and Consulting enjoys educating board members on many topics. Today we will tackle capital improvements in your association. We find that we get a lot of repeat board members for these events. We believe that happens because you always leave with new knowledge to make your communities better. I can't see all of you today, but if I could, I'd ask you to raise your hands if you were all working on one of the following projects in your associations. Concrete restoration, new roofs, new windows, new balconies and railings, elevator refurbishment or replacement, lobby and hallway renovations, pools, pool decks or planters, new cooling tower or other equipment, parking garages, roads, significant landscaping projects, replacing pipes, ductwork, upgrading electric. All of those are projects that can stress you out, take time, and cost money. Let's get started. We have a fantastic panel of experts that will dazzle you today with their knowledge and brilliance. You can see them in front of us. Don't they look like people that will dazzle today? Let me introduce our panelists. Let me start with Ken Direktor. Ken is the chair of the Community Association practice at Becker Law. Welcome, Ken.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Ken always has a very cool setting with his guitar collection. So Ken, thanks for sharing those with us.
I won't be playing.
We'll do that later for anyone who wants to stay after. We might be disconnected, but we'll be listening to you. I also want to welcome June Willcott, principal at Willcott Engineering Incorporated. June, this is your first time to join me with one of these webinars, so we're looking forward to all the knowledge that you have in the engineering world.
Thank you so much. Glad to be here today. Hope to answer some questions.
Thanks for taking the time. And we have Dan Odess. Dan is the president of GlobalPro, a public adjuster and very popular in this market. And I will give Dan credit. He's got the coolest set of all of us today with his radio TV personality. So Dan, thanks for joining us again.
Thank you, Tim. I really appreciate it and love being a part of these. Always get some great questions and amazing content. So thank you again. And thank you to all the panelists also for joining us.
Thanks, Dan. And then we also have Bruce Masia, Vice President of KW Property Management Consulting. Bruce has been with our company for 11 years. He came from the construction world. Bruce has great knowledge on projects. He's got over $300 million worth of projects going on in the portfolio of accounts that he's responsible for KW. So Bruce, welcome back and thank you for bringing all your knowledge and your new haircut.
Thanks, Tim. Always a pleasure, but I wish I had a cool setup like Ken, but I'll just have to watch his setup.
We did accuse Bruce of working from a prison cell today, but clearly the warden is treating him fine. He gets to be on our call. All right, so let's get started. I'm going to start with you, Bruce. So we're going to talk about projects, and as a property management company, we hear about projects. Boards are concerned about which projects do I start with? Am I funded properly? When do I do these things? How do I vote for these? We're going to talk about all these topics. And for those of you listening today, if you have a question, feel free to type the question in the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen, and we will address those questions. I did get 4 or 5 questions before today's event started with your registration, so we will address those questions. So Bruce, management often is the first to know about a project. So what's the best advice you can give a board when contemplating getting started with a project?
Well, Tim, this is the ideal time of year to talk about projects. We're in the midst of budget season right now. So if we are going to think about anything through 2021, now is the time to really talk about those things that you would like to do. Major capital projects cost a lot of money. Smaller projects, obviously, those are things that, can be thrown in there, but major capital projects, require money from either special assessments, loans, lines of credits, and things of this nature. So I would suggest very heavily in regard to this, good planning, through boards. So when I talk about good planning, we're talking about short, mid, and long-term planning. June can talk about, some wonderful things, what's called reserve studies. Reserve studies are very key in planning for the future. You will know that, making sure that you're saving the right amount in your reserves as well. These are all key factors at this time of the year. Couldn't be a better time of the year, and that's why I'm highlighting that right now. If you caught me 6 months down the road, I would probably give you a different answer. So I really want to make sure that to answer that question, we're highlighting this particular time of the year.
Okay, so Ken, that's kind of the timing. We usually learn about it from just conversations with the board. When contemplating a project, how should a board involve their attorney? At what point's the right time?
Well, there are two legal aspects of embarking on a project, and I'm putting aside for now the construction contract and the construction oversight, which are fairly heavy legal issues. The first question is, who has to approve the project? And that depends to a large extent on what the project is. If the project is necessary maintenance, typically the project can be approved by a board vote. But the first step is consult your attorney as to whose approval is required, because the distinction between maintenance versus alterations, which typically requires a membership vote, is a critical distinction to be made at the outset. And you have to get the approvals necessary before you sign a contract, because you can't sign a contract for a project which isn't properly approved. And you also can't sign a contract for a project that isn't necessarily within the purview of the board. For example, if a certain component of the building is the responsibility of the unit owner, the board can't sign a contract to perform that project because it's not a valid common expense. It's not within the purview of the association to undertake that project. The second aspect of the planning in terms of involving your attorney up front is, how are we going to pay for it? Do we have reserves to tap into? Do we not have reserves for this project and we need to use them and take the appropriate vote to get approval to use reserve funds? Number three, are we going to levy a special assessment? Whose approval is required for an assessment? Is it a board vote? Following the notice procedures for the board meeting to adopt the assessment is indispensable. And thirdly, are we going to have to finance this by borrowing money, setting up a line of credit? Are we going to set payment terms where the owners have the option to pay in full? Are we going to require all owners to pay over time? Are we going to include a due on sale clause? So to summarize, I've covered a lot in a very quick answer there, but the first question is, find out whose approval is required to do the project and make sure you follow the procedural requirements and get that required approval. Number two, talk to your counsel up front as to how you intend to pay for it, and make sure you follow all the procedural requirements to arrange for payment.
And then Ken, when you're, even kind of before some of that, when you're thinking about the project, you have to have a scope of work. You got to figure out what you're going to do. Talk about what it means for a project to change something from a material alteration. What is a material alteration? How do you tackle that before you start approving projects and pounding nails and changing things out?
Well, the distinction between what is maintenance and what is an alteration has bedeviled boards for, I don't know, 40 or 50 years. And, it's been a boondoggle for lawyers, because maintenance starts with something being broken. And that's something you turn to your engineers for. Is something broken? If nothing is broken, if you decide it's time to redecorate the lobby, for example, that's going to be very difficult to characterize as a maintenance project. Secondly, if something is broken, what does an engineer say is the best way to deal with it? For example, if you're replacing something that was built at a time when the building code allowed it, and the building code would no longer allow it, is bringing it up to code an alteration? The answer is no. But it goes even further than that. If an engineer says, you can't reinstall this the same way, it's going to look different, but I can't counsel you in good conscience as an engineer to install this the same way, there is what's called, Tim, a maintenance exception to the alteration rule. In other words, if you have something broken and in the course of maintaining it, you use a better product, something that is more durable, something that is easier to maintain, something that has a better warranty, something that takes advantage of developments in technology, that can still be a maintenance decision, even if at the end of the day, what you have is different from what you had before. But the simple thing, you're never going to pound a square peg into a round hole with a redecorating project. A project which by definition involves aesthetic changes, a desire to modernize, a desire to change the look, you're never going to be able to characterize that as maintenance because it isn't. It is at least in part an alteration. I would also say that when you make this distinction, you also have to look at the statute that governs your community, whether you're a 720 association or a cooperative under 719 or a condominium under chapter 718. You have to look at the statute and you obviously have to look at your documents because the approval requirements, even for alterations, vary from document to document.
Okay, that's a very good point. So let's talk about kind of the roles that people play. Bruce, back to you. What role does the manager play in these construction projects? Because the manager isn't they're not the engineer, they're not an owner's rep, they're not a general contractor, they're not a public adjuster. So what role do they play working with the board?
Tim, I've appeared on a number of these webinars, and even if you go to our YouTube channel of KW Property Management, I go ahead and I explain it in much more depth of exactly the role. A property manager should be a facilitator. They're not an engineer. They're not a construction expert. They are a facilitator. And that's really important to know because what boards do, they get themselves into trouble to think, oh, the property manager is going to be our project manager. Well, a property manager might understand a budget. They might understand some construction. They might have done some things. Even with my background, I probably could do a great job being a project manager, but I am not a full-fledged project manager. So if I'm going to make a recommendation, I'm going to tell boards that gathering a team together of professionals, a lawyer that you have like Ken to review your contracts, having a project manager that's going to watch your project and watch your engineer, and gathering the right team is going to be all of the elements that you need for success. Engineers can play project managers, but I don't recommend that. They're engineers, and that's what they do best, is be engineers from that end. And not to say that they won't watch your project. And what ends up happening is that everyone says, well, let me try to take that cheap path. And how am I going to go and cut my costs and anything? So I'm going to let the engineer do it, and nothing against June there. I'm sure she could do it. She could do a great job. But you know, that's where you go with this. And your property manager is the one that's going to be there facilitating, making sure that everyone is coordinating with each other, everyone is talking. Because the biggest job that a property manager should be doing is managing the property and answering all the questions and everything else and putting all that information out to the residents and informing the board. Because when you sit through these meetings, these construction meetings on a weekly basis, which I highly recommend that you have one if you're doing a capital improvement project, they're boring meetings. They could go on for hours, some of them. So having the right manager there to be able to facilitate, to be able to communicate back to the residents and especially to the board is going to be the right thing to do for your organization, and you're going to set yourself up with success by doing it that way.
So Bruce, I think you make a good point there because without any projects at all going on in your building, your property manager likely has a full-time job. So then you throw something like a project in and it creates more time, more stress on that manager to manage something else besides just the building and all the people that live there. So let me turn to you, June, if I could. Bruce's answer is probably music to your ears. We just said we're not trying to be the engineer. So what role do you see the engineer play in projects in community associations, and at what point's the right time to engage that engineer?
Thanks so much. All of us are valuable entities in the roles that we play for it. I like how Bruce used the word facilitate for manager. Your engineer is your communicator or translator of your building needs. So we want to go out, want to do a condition assessment, want to meet your building, see how it looks, how it performs. How old is it? How was it built? What's its prior maintenance history? What are its immediate needs? What are its hopes and goals? Ken mentioned maybe their interiors. Maybe, as Bruce has said, there's some other special asides. Maybe there's some things in your reserve study, and you say, hey, it's time for us to deal with paints, sealants. We had a little stuff fall off. We need to look at that. So the first is your translator or building need. The second is that after the engineer's done the assessment, they come back and communicate with the subset of the building called the board. And they say, how are you? Here's your building. Here's what we assess. Here's what you told us. Here's what we know and don't know. Here are the recommended steps. And then the teamwork really comes into play, and we all exchange information about what that means. The engineer is next the technical driving factor in defining and specifying the work, so that now the boards and associations can get competitive bids from contractors for the work that they're interested in doing. They're able to utilize their management team and assess what those bids mean, what's the most responsive bid for them. And then the third phase that you see your engineer involved in on a capital improvement assessment is what we call construction observation and contract administration. And what we want to do with that is to administer the contract that Ken and his people have helped write, work within the constraints that Bruce and management have defined for what the board and building responsibilities are, administer and sign for those dollars, Tim. So we're the ones who are watching contractor cash flow for that. And then we also do the inspections necessary and attendant with that. Different levels of service. Some have higher service need, some have lower service need. But I think that gives you a good comprehensive picture of where it is that your engineer wants to fit into and needs to fit into your capital improvement.
So June, I think that it's fair to say that these projects are oftentimes expensive and complicated projects, and having an engineer is necessary. Then there are projects that get large, and there's somebody out there known as an owner's rep or a project manager. How is that different from the role of the engineer? And do you see those as different responsibilities or just one thing rolled under the engineer?
Oh, thank you, Tim. I see them as valuable puzzle pieces and part of the same puzzle. The engineer's role is to be there for the building, a non-biased, technical, well-qualified voice of the building. And that means that it would be a conflict for me to represent Unit 1003. I just made that number up. An owner's rep, they're really there to handhold every unit in the building. They're there to see that the facility operates while all of this intrusive and interruptive work is done. They're there to make sure that the day-to-day administration of the contract, where people are parking, where debris is, how access to your amenities may be controlled, how the elevator could be impacted during some phase of it. They are so valuable to us as an engineer because they're a way for us to communicate back to a large group of people and yet maintain the integrity of the contract, the interest for the building at large. They're a very valuable team member. They participate in construction meetings. They're there day to day for the unit owners to be able to troubleshoot, feed questions to the right people. And I will tell you, in the last years, we're seeing more and more involvement out of owners' reps. So I think the market's maturing to where you're beginning to see that involvement. You want it for complex projects, and you really want it for projects that have day-to-day impact for each of you as owners. Thanks, Tim.
Thank you, June. So Dan, you have kind of an interesting perspective because you typically get involved when there's been damage or an insurance claim. That's when you get involved, and then projects result from that. And you come in and look at the dynamics and relationship that may exist from the property manager, engineer, owner's rep. Like, what do you see as the best approach for managing a project for a community association when you get involved in them?
Well, I think Ken made a comment about things breaking and leading to projects, and then making the decision between, are they capital improvement projects, are they something aesthetic, or is it maintenance? I've been involved in, obviously, in a lot of that, the decision making that came out of that, and where you see where we'll get one recovery and then the association pivots and says, okay, well, while we're doing that in the hallway, why don't we go ahead and do more? And then they expand that project and scope. The difficulty with that is the timing of it. A lot of associations want to immediately make repairs and start making those improvements to, whether it's the common areas, the hallways, or the gyms, or whatever it is. And a lot of times, if we have not satisfactorily settled or 100% settled your loss, and you start to move into that next phase and the actual rebuilding and improving, there tends to be some confusion as to what you can actually claim for and what you reasonably can recover for. And so to avoid that, we want to make sure that the claim process obviously goes all the way through, and then you can make logical decisions going forward. Also, a lot of times people will shortcut the claims process that gets started on the capital improvement project, and because they have reserves, and like, oh, no, we already reserved to do improvements. Now we have a little extra money from the insurance. Let's just get going. But the reality of it is your insurance company may owe you to do a large part of what you may think is an improvement, but really is simply restoring your property to a pre-loss condition. So you need to take your time, patience, allow your manager to be the facilitator, as Bruce said, involve as many people in the process as you can. I do know that in some bylaws, and I'm sure Ken can speak to this, that there are certain dollar values assigned to obligations by board to hire certain professionals to come in, like construction managers or engineers, to oversee those projects. A lot of that cost, if it's stemming from a claim, such as a recoverable loss, can be covered by your insurance. So again, don't get sticker shocked by the cost of doing something like that, because I can tell you also, even if it's not recoverable, a lot of times these construction managers or involving engineers early on in the process can save you a ton of money on the end of it. Growing up in the construction business and doing a lot of construction management, as an owner's rep, I can tell you firsthand, I can't tell you how many issues I saw well before the first piece of drywall or wall came down. So it's important that before the materials start to show up and before the team start to arrive on your property, is that you have a really good idea and perspective as to where you're going. Because I'm sure all of us on this panel and most of our attendees that are listening in today have seen a project run over budget and take considerably longer than it's supposed to. So from an insurance perspective, when you're talking about things breaking and then improvement projects stemming from that, it's important to fully understand where the improvement project actually truly started and where it ended, and making sure that your insurance company doesn't take advantage of the situation and kind of shuffle everything over into some type of improvement. There's also a comment about ordinance or law, and whether it's code related. Again, something that potentially could be recoverable. Look at your policies. You're paying more than ever. It's, a lot there. I know I just said a lot of different nuances, things we can dive into. But I am a huge advocate of an owner's rep involving your professionals early on in the process.
Bruce, what is your take on an owner's rep?
Tim, I could tell you around 6-7 years ago, I was probably one of those anti-owner rep people. I kept on saying, oh, we could do this, we could do this. But as these projects came about, and the complexity of these projects and the amount of money that is being spent on these projects, my opinion right now is that it is probably the best dollars that you could spend. Have an attorney, get a real good attorney to review your contracts, to make sure, someone like Ken and his firm, to make sure, get a good engineer, but also having that owner's reps, like everybody was talking about, is really the key for a successful project. So you'll realize at the end of that project, whatever extra money that you spent on that owner's rep, it's going to be every penny worthwhile.
Okay, and is there a dollar value where it makes sense to start having an owner's rep, as far as a project being too small or too big, where it's like, we don't really need an owner's rep until it reaches a level, because there's an expense for an owner's rep?
I think it's about the intricacies of the project. I think it's really about, you know, what is the technical aspect of the project? So, for example, you know, if you're going to replace your cooling tower, there's a lot of intricacies of doing that. There's a lot of coordinations. There's a lot of different components of going on there, and a lot of pre-planning to that also. Well, that project is not going to take, you know, months and months or even years to do, but that would be very prudent to hire someone as that professional person to do it. It would be a short term. If you're going to do, Ken was talking about maybe like, you know, painting the hallways or something like, well, that doesn't make any sense about, you know, hiring a project manager to do some interior work of that nature. But when it starts to get complicated or it starts to get the intricacies of that, there's many different components, it's probably the best dollars you can spend on it. It's cost a little bit more, but at the end, it's going to save a lot of aggravation and redos and spending extra money that you don't have to spend.
So Ken, we talked a little bit about different kinds of projects. Dan brings in you know, the element of insurance projects and improvements, repairs. At what point do you need to have a membership vote for something versus just the board can approve and move and say, we're going to do this project?
Well, first of all, the membership vote is triggered either by a provision of the documents. There are some poorly drafted documents that say if you're going to do something more than a certain dollar amount, even if it's maintenance, you need a membership vote to approve paying for it. By the way, those are not good document provisions. You never want to have to go to the members for a vote to approve necessary maintenance because it ties the board's hands and prevents you from discharging your maintenance obligation. So I don't favor those, but some old documents have those ridiculous provisions. In the most cases, and probably 90% plus of the cases, if the project is maintenance, and again, maintenance starts with something being broken and the repair being done either to replace with like kind or to replace with something better based upon engineering criteria, not aesthetic criteria, you are still likely to be within the maintenance context. I cannot emphasize this strongly enough. I grew up in the 70s, and there was a commercial for Fram oil filters with a mechanic leaning on the hood of the car holding an oil filter. Does anybody on this panel remember what he said? You
Pay me now,
or you can pay me later.
Later.
A short phone call with a well-credentialed association attorney at the point that you are making preliminary determinations will save you a lot of heartache. I cannot overstress that point. Ask the question before you leap, not while you're going down the cliff. And it's worth mentioning, Tim, that there was a recent case, an appellate case, that applied a new provision in the statute. If you do not have an alteration provision in your documents, and you go ahead and undertake an alteration without taking the statutorily required 75% vote for a condo, you are not permitted to subsequently take a ratification vote. You now have to restore the property to what it was before.
Have you ever dealt with that, Ken, where someone had to reverse gears and put the property back the way it was? Have you ever seen that?
It is a very new provision in the statute that I don't like, because associations should have the right to ratify decisions that are within their power but are not done in a procedurally correct manner. But if you do not have alteration provisions in your documents and you are stuck with the statute and you skip the statutory vote and make a change, the statute says you got to put it back the way it was. You cannot go back and take an after the fact membership vote to dust your trail. Not permitted.
And so Ken, based on the condo docs that you see in most or any association documents, how many bids are typically required for a project?
It really varies. And as Bruce correctly points out, the way you handle some of these things depends upon the complexity of the project. It depends upon the availability of contractors. Some jobs are highly specialized. And also there are a lot of people who claim to be able to do a project. But the best place to get recommendations for bidders, not the number of bidders, but to go get bidders, is from your manager, to the extent he or she has had experience with this kind of a project, your engineer, who can tell you which contractors he or she would want to work with. And it's always good to get as many bids as you can. That's not to suggest you should get 10 or 12, but 2 or 3 at a minimum. And it's worth mentioning, you don't have to take the lowest bid.
And that's a good point, Ken, as far as the resources that are available to you, because from a management company perspective, we often get asked for who's done good work, who would you recommend? And I'm sure, June, when they come to you, do you provide that kind of consultation to board members as far as how many bids you should get? Do they ask you for trades that you believe could do good work for them?
Thank you. We do. We do. Our recommendation at large is to say 5 bids, so that you could theoretically throw out a high and low bid and have 3 in the middle. We help associations in defining pre-qualifications for the bidders. So we like to set those packages up and send them out to all the people before they've even received the project manual. Tells you about their ability to bond, tells you about what their insurance is, tells you about similar properties they've worked on, tells you about similar projects. It allows management and board to make a few phone calls on them, see how that goes. We don't like to see any more than 7 bidders. We find it conflagrates the process instead of streamlining a process. If you want to consider 14 people, we would say, let's go through pre-qualifying and really get 5 good contractors that are legitimately focused on this. We do a pre-bid. We want to get the most competitive bid we can on behalf of the association for them to be able to pick from that. So we do recommend, we will not choose the contractor. It's so important to us that that relationship be chosen and entered into by the board and building and the contractor. You know, we each have different personalities and how we might negotiate our contracts and things. And these projects are for long-term commitment. Invariably, what I speak to you about is a project over a year long. Some of those projects can be 2+ years long. And it's so critical that all of the decision makers, you know, who's really funding this repair? Each of you as individual owners. I mean, even through insurance proceeds in a way, there's still the person who that is. So we like to be able to look at that, give you the best bidders board, and let you negotiate and sign in with your legal counsel, management, and team for the best contractor you can to be able to do that work. Thanks, Tim.
Tim, I would like to add a legal wrinkle onto what June has just said, if you don't mind. You talked about using your resources. You made that point as part of your question, but it bears emphasis. The board is protected by what's called the business judgment rule when it does maintenance on the property. And what that basically means is that the courts do not want to have to arbitrate when it's time to paint, what kind of paint to use, how far to go with excavation when you're doing concrete repair. The courts don't want any part of that. They are willing to defer to the board to make maintenance decisions and exercise reasonable business judgment. And the best way to protect the board's exercise of business judgment and to do so reasonably is to lean on your engineer, to have, as Bruce pointed out, a project supervisor or an owner's rep for the more involved projects, like a concrete restoration project that is going to involve unit invasions, or a reconstruction after a major casualty that requires entering a lot of different units. Those are precisely the kind of projects where you want to have an owner's rep. But by leaning on the resources available to you to get expert advice, you are protecting yourself by exercising reasonable business judgment, not going out on a lark of your own.
Well, but also, Ken, talk about the importance of the attorney reviewing the contract. A lot of boards will say, gee, we don't want to spend the money. We'll sign. If you guys think it looks okay, we'll sign it. Like, why is it so important for the attorney to actually look at these contracts?
Well, the contractor will say, this is the AIA form. It's what everybody uses. Industry forms are written by the industry for the industry. The owner you have all the leverage in the world at the beginning. And that's when you negotiate terms in terms of how change orders are processed, what constitutes substantial completion, what the consequences are, like a liquidated damage provision in the event somebody doesn't achieve substantial completion in time, what you can do in terms of making sure there's an orderly handling of the employees and the laborers that are on site, what the insurance coverages are, what your termination rights are. All of those provisions can be negotiated and structured to protect the association until you sign the contract. Then all the leverage swings the other way. The most pivotal issues to address are price, scope, and timing, time for completion. If you don't take care of those three, nothing else is going to help you.
And so, Ken, you make a really good point when you talk about signing the contract. Our feeling is that all contracts should be signed by the board. Don't let your manager sign it. Manager doesn't have the financial investment in the property. They're different mindset. Your attorney can't sign it. It's the responsibility of the board. The board's making this decision. The board ultimately selects the vendors. The board should sign the contracts and be responsible for that.
Absolutely. That'll be the shortest answer I'll give all afternoon. Absolutely.
So Dan, I know you've heard a lot here, like jump in here.
Yeah.
You know, your take on this.
You know, everyone's mentioned the word insurance in some part of their responses. And Ken has said it several times, and June as well. And we talked about, you know, and kind of building on what June had to say regarding qualifying contractors. Think of it this way. When you're going to get married with this contract, you're going to be there for a while. If you're doing a significant project, you're going to want to know where their skeletons are in their closet and what they've done previously. A lot of times there's a lot of focus on getting recommendations of projects they're proud of. How about finding out about the projects that they may not be so proud of by asking about any lawsuits that they've been involved in, any claims made against their insurance, things like that. Let's look at a real record here. You know, again, they all have their hit list of their projects they're most proud of. Usually they're on their website. And then we go and ask them for the references and they give us the same ones. Let's dig a little bit deeper when we're qualifying contractors and start getting a history, because that history can become important if there's an issue on your job. You can look to that prior experience and see how it was mitigated or resolved and what you may be looking forward to or the cost you may be expecting in order to dealing with the issue when it arises on your property. So I think it's really important that people stop looking for the good and start looking for the bad when you're qualifying those contractors and seeing where they've screwed up, because there's very few contractors in South Florida that I'm aware of that have ever had a clean record. They've all have had some issue. And that issue may or may not be relevant. If it's not relevant, then it's better you know now than later. If it is, start asking questions about it. Doesn't mean that they're not qualified for your job, because the fact is that every job is different. And as a licensed general contractor, which I am for many years, and I do develop and build my own buildings and construction, and I have been hired as a construction manager in the past by clients, and I've performed many, many millions of dollars worth of construction jobs. I can tell you that not every job is the same, and there's different nuances to it, but it may make them more qualified by understanding how they dealt with a tough situation, how they took care of their clients, and how they got on the other side of it, so that you have a reasonable expectation of what happens when things don't go so well as planned. And your construction manager, with that information, can look for those issues on the job and make sure you avoid them in the future. And I think that goes a long way to helping associations, certainly with regards to budgets and planning and reserves, and avoiding a desperate fate, especially with the potential for delinquencies on the horizon and all those other bad things that are supposedly come out of this pandemic. And make sure that we're protecting our unit owners in the best we possibly can. I think it's utterly, utterly important that we start asking questions out, because I can't think of a time where I got involved in a construction-related loss where those kinds of questions were asked before the association got in bed with that contractor.
So it sounds like everybody's talking about, you know, prepare before you start. And if you prepare the right way, you're going to have fewer mishaps on the back end of these projects. Because oftentimes, I'm sure, June, you walk into it, we certainly walk into it. A lot of times we get hired by associations when they're in the middle of a project that is not going well, and they hire you because they want you to fix things, and that happens often. Now, there is no miracle pill that you can take. You can get hired, but if you put the right processes in place, it does take time, but you can get things put right back on track. So Bruce, question for you. How can an association protect itself to ensure that a project is completed once the contract is signed? Can you talk about performance bonds and what that actually means?
You know, Tim, I think that this is where the attorneys come in. This is where people like Ken and his team, where they're going to protect the association. I think, you know, going in and getting an education about performance bonds, you know, people think, oh my God, if something happens, that bond's going to pay out right away. And I've learned too many times during poor projects, and, you know, when they started and when, all of a sudden contractors defunct and they go out of business and so forth, that they expect, oh, we've got this bond, it's going to pick us up. And they don't realize a bond doesn't work like an insurance policy. It's a much different kind of, if you want to say, animal that's out there. And I want to go into the education of it, but that's something that you should be educated on. That your retention money is also, how much retention money are you going to keep in this project, and once you get it going, and how much are you going to give up. There's all these different things when contractors go ahead and they start doing pay apps that they submit, and there's things that they're going to want on those pay apps and days that they're going to extend. These are all the things, you stressed it already. We've all been stressing it, trying to do all this upfront. Change orders or big things that are out there that could, the project you think might be $1 million, and all of a sudden now you're at $5 million. So, lump sum contracts, these are where the engineers and where your owner's reps come in to guide you, because once that project goes, and like Ken said, do you want to pick up the phone now when it's all messed up and now you want me to bail you out? I could have done that very easily in the beginning, and you could have spent a lot less money, because I know Ken, I know he doesn't mind billing you and making money, but of course he's looking after you. Of course he's humble about that. And then June is going to get in and she's going to say, well, now I got to do this whole new scope and change and everything else. Oh my God, now you're getting into all this other additional money. So again, there are ways of making sure there are stopgap measures that you put in once this thing goes, that you put into place so that you don't get into trouble. I've had associations that were very stubborn, that have gone from projects that were estimated at 3 million, and I'm sorry to say it went to 21 million. It's a great white paper to show how not to do projects and how to listen to those people around you. And there are no stopgaps in there, because once you're into a restoration, June can tell you, you can estimate as much, delamination on stucco and everything, but you're not going to know until you get up there, until you start chipping away and you start knowing, oh my God, we underestimated, and our price per linear foot or square foot, whatever we got there, is not enough, or you know what, we didn't do a good job bidding from all those things. So these are all the things that I can recommend, Tim. This is why, in all due respect, I think that's why you hire a professional management company and you hire good people like are on the screen here to really guide you through projects like this.
So Dan, you deal with a lot of different projects. Do you deal with performance bonds? What's your recommendation on that?
We've gotten involved in it because there's always a question of offset and where that money applies, or how much of it you can recover, and versus the insurance and the liability policies, the OSIPs, the RAPs, and the property insurance, and the various different other layers and things that are there to afford protections. And a lot of times, as it relates directly to the performance bonds, usually something the attorneys are handling directly with that company. And however, they're relying on the information we're providing them, because we want to provide it in a manner in which doesn't prejudice us from recovering from, let's say, the other GL policies, the OSIPs, and all the other insurance that you've had there that is in place. And a lot of times, along with the performance bonds, you get questions regarding warranties and things like that. But like the bonds and the warranties, they're very limited. They don't react as quickly as most people think. And in fact, I'd actually say that insurance these days seems to be responding much more quickly and actually have a more logical outcome than either of the two. So I definitely think it's something that you need to ask a lot of questions about upfront. Also, confirm the details of the bond, confirm the details of the warranties. I think a lot of people are confused because they just get a piece of paper and some supporting information, but don't actually even know what they do with it in the event that there actually is an issue. And unfortunately, I've seen some attorneys take the process in the wrong direction. And we've had to kind of put the wheels back, on the track through the insurance process. So I think it's, I think working with a credible firm will obviously avoid stuff like that, but it's certainly something to look out for.
Tim, can I just add one quick thing to that? Dan brought up something about warranties. And that's something that you really need to consult your engineer, because your engineer, when they put that spec together, that scope of work, is looking, I hope they're looking into the future of that, because those warranties have to be inspected. There needs to be documentation. There needs to be all of this in there. So sometimes substituting products are not the right things and all these different things. So Dan really brought up a very good point that I just wanted to quickly highlight. And those are the things that I would expect our engineer to be looking at, because those are the things that we're going to be left with. And that's, left with, meaning that we have in our hands, this is where Ken's going to come in. If there's a defect or something of that nature, this is what he's going to want to see. Are these warranties, and were they done? Were they inspected correctly? Did they go about the manufacturer specs of putting it in correctly? Were they certified? Was the contractor certified? Not all contractors can lay certain material. You have to be certified to lay certain material that they've gotten certified from the manufacturer. So I just wanted to bring that quick point up.
Okay, so June, I know you've been nodding your head. You probably have a lot to add to this, but I'd like for you to comment on the warranties. But then Bruce mentioned that dirty two-name word called change orders that oftentimes have a big ticket at the end of them. So talk a little bit about warranties, and then talk about change orders and how do you avoid change orders? Because change orders can be caused. Bruce talked about a project that went from $3 million to $21 million. So to me, that sounds like $18 million of change orders. So let's talk about that as well. And then Ken, I want to get to you with some of the contract language that we need to address.
I'll tackle warranty first. Yes, all of the project manuals, our project manuals, have warranty periods for all of the products that are there. So there's a warranty period for paint, there's a warranty period for sealant, for concrete repair materials, for repairs that are done, for waterproofing. Those warranties can range anywhere on a specialized project that's a one thing to 1 year to 20-year warranties. And so like Bruce is saying, wouldn't you hate to get to the end of your waterproofing project that was a $5 million project, and you were ready to get your 20-year warranty, and they said, hey, Joe didn't inspect this. He's never out there. He had to be out there the whole time. He had to know you first. He had to do other things for you before he was able to utilize that warranty. So our project manuals ask for a form of warranty at the beginning. We ask for it to be certified by the manufacturer as well as by the contractor. So we have a dry run of the paperwork when we start. All of those need to be hemmed in. Your owner's rep's an ideal person to help you coordinate and facilitate that you get all of those. Change orders. Change orders. Probably every job you do will have a change order. Why would we say that? Well, if it's a job for concrete restoration and repair, and you're at that age, your engineer's done their best job to guess what those quantities are going to be. They've evaluated the building. Maybe they've looked at every balcony. Maybe they've extrapolated. But in anything they've done, they've given you their best guesstimate. And so just on concrete repair quantity, what you're going to do your whole job is reconcile floor by floor what you did. It usually happens in a stack because you're on a swing stage. So we're going to do 01 units, and we're going to reconcile concrete repair. Halfway through the job, we're going to say on the 01 stack, we've used 40% of our budget, not too shabby. We think we guessed pretty good. And we're going to calibrate ourselves through the whole process. If we're really bad, before we finish the first drop, we ran out all our money. We truly did not have a handle on what the scope was. There's the place to come in and regroup with everyone. Ken, you could probably speak on contracts about what happens when there's a material change from 3 million to 21 million. I sure hope there are some benchmarks along the way that would allow the board to be able to control some of those decisions going on. There will be surprises in the work you do. There will be unforeseen circumstances that need to be worked with. There will be things that require either a little more money or a little more time than what you originally envisioned. Those don't queer your whole job. They're just part of one of the processes that need to be worked through as you achieve your overall budget. So Ken, I have seen in contracts some language that sort of helps bracket if you missed it by that much. So I hope that helped.
Ken, what say you?
Well, first of all, You know, we forgot the most elemental cause of change orders. And June referred to concrete restoration, and we've talked about roof projects. You know what happens in South Florida during the summer? It rains every day. And if you don't have a process for change orders based upon weather delays, for example, if you're reaching the deadline under your contract for substantial completion on a concrete project on September 25th, which is tomorrow, and the contractor says we're nowhere near done because we had rain delays on May 6th, May 9th, May 20th, May 31st, and all these other dates, and you're sitting there thinking, well, how the heck can I remember whether it rained that day and if it rained enough to force them off the job? You have to have a process for how to establish change orders based upon change in the scope of work, but also changes based upon force majeure and based upon the weather. As for the warranty, a lot of people, the warranty is just a form document attached to the contract. They don't read it. My longtime partner, who June knows very well, Steve Lesser, likes to tell a story about roof shingles that are put on by a manufacturer by the name of Monsanto. And their warranty says that all claims for defects have to be litigated in a particular city in New Jersey. You know what the name of the city is? Monsanto. And do you know who everybody in Monsanto, New Jersey works for? Monsanto. And the warranty says you have to go through a panel of arbitrators chosen from among the people in Monsanto. So if you don't, and I realize this all sounds funny, but it is serious. Because if you're spending 7 figures for a new roof and you're using products where you have both a warranty from the installer and a warranty from the supplier, you need to have your counsel look at those warranty documents so you know what you're getting. The fact that there are leaks or the fact that there's just ponding may impact whether or not you have a warranty claim. I mean, these are issues that are probably better directed to a construction lawyer, which is not what I do, but these are critical issues to deal with up front, because if the work isn't done right and you have not vetted your warranty documents to make sure you have something of value there, something that addresses the most typical defects that can arise from this kind of a project, you really screwed the pooch.
So Ken, why is it important to have a notice of commencement? Can you talk about what that is and what goes into a notice of commencement for projects?
Simply put, a notice of commencement protects the association to the extent the contractor uses subcontractors and material men. Anybody who does work on the project, even those that do not have a direct contract with the association, which includes the people I just mentioned, subcontractors, material suppliers, they have the right to lien the property if they are not paid. Recording and posting a notice of commencement requires them to deliver to the association within a certain number of days after they commence work, a document called a notice to owner. A notice to owner is a document that says, just want you to know as the property owner that I'm out here, that I'm working on your property, and that I've got lien rights if I don't get paid. And that way, when you do your closeout at the end of the job, when you make your progress payments, you can require partial releases from the people who have served a notice to owner. You can require statements of account from people who have served a notice to owner. And at the end of the day, you can get final releases from everyone who has worked on the project so that you know that you're not going to pay in full, go back to your life, and then suddenly get a notice from a supplier or a subcontractor saying, I wasn't paid, I'm owed $85,000, and I'm gonna lien the property unless you pay for it. This is what construction lawyers refer to as avoiding having to pay twice.
All right, Dan, I see you smiling there. I know you got a comment on this.
Yeah, I mean, when people start talking about warranties, I start thinking about toilet paper. I just, it's, I've rarely seen a warranty actually perform the way in which we understood it when we bargained for it and negotiated for it and then overpaid for the roof or whatever the building apparatus might be. Because the reality of it is that there's so many nuances to the warranties, and as Ken noted with the whole Monsanto thing and everything else, I mean, it's just, there's always something, there's always some issue with it. And by the way, most of them only cover for the cost of the material. A lot of times you'll see that, which doesn't even include the shipping of the material or the delivery of the material or the logistic issues surrounding getting that material on top of your 40-story building in the middle of downtown. And also as well as the labor to put that material on, or the permit or the inspections of the crane and everything else that goes into it. So, I mean, again, it's something at times laughable, and like with bonds, I think it's become overly complicated, and truly at the end of the day, we resolve ourselves to dealing with a claim. And that's why it's important that when we are making records, we're building records, and we are going through the reports, whether it's with June or your owner's rep, that those records are consistent, and also taking consideration of the language that's found in typical construction type policies or property insurance policies, whether there's OSIP, RAP policies, GL, or your condo association's own insurance. Some of the issues that we see arise from, quote, warranty claims are recoverable under some sort of insurance that may already be available. And unfortunately, I see a lot of associations go through this exhaustive warranty process and dealing with the bond and filing a lot of letters and running up quite a legal bill before they realize that they could have just simply filed an insurance claim, gotten paid, hired someone else to come out, hire someone like June to write up a spec for it and make the repair. All of those expenses may even be included and covered. So it's sometimes, you know, as we need to definitely protect ourselves, and we definitely need to make sure they have the bonding. But understand, bonding usually is an indication of prior performance. And as I made a comment earlier about asking about when it didn't go well, a lot of times if you see a contractor struggling to obtain a bond, or their bond is out of the ordinary, there's some nuance to it, usually because they probably don't have that greatest record of bad things. So it's important, though, that when you are creating records and information to fix those issues, that you consider its implications for a recovery. And most people don't think that construction-related losses are covered by first-party property insurance, that being the association's own insurance. But I'm here to say that I was a part of the precedent that was set in Florida, and then further upheld, that in fact you can recover for some, if not all, of those damages under your own insurance, which it really takes the legal part of it out of your hands, forfeits it over to your insurance companies at no cost to you, and then they will pursue those claims for you on your behalf against the contractor to make themselves whole. So there's a lot of things to consider. It's very complicated. In construction, I hate change orders. Change orders are inevitable, as you've heard from all the panelists here. But making sure those change orders are consistent with your construction documents is something I struggle with a lot of times when dealing with the claim side of it. So again, make sure they're using the same verbiage or words that were agreed upon in the contract. A lot of people use the standard AIA forms, as Ken had noted. I can't tell you how many times you look at the change order and it looks just like a basic invoice that, you know, some homeowner would have gotten, with some general amount of, you know, just reference to material, no unit pricing, no quantities, no time, date stamps, things like that. All very, very important. A warranty, just bringing one last thing I want to say before I forget, regarding like things like Tremco. A lot of times requires photographic evidence and things like that, but making sure that you retain those things is important. A lot of people will hire engineers or other outside consultants to come in and don't retain any of that information themselves. And without it, your warranty claims are going to get immediately denied.
Great, thank you, Dan. Ken, one other point I want to ask you about is there's something out there called release of liens. What is a release of lien? Is it something legal or practical, and why is it important?
Well, if you're asking me, I think you probably know it's legal. A release of lien removes the cloud of title from your property, and releases of lien come in two forms. You can get partial releases of lien as you make partial payments as the project proceeds, and you most importantly get a final release of lien at the end of the project. Tim, I want to make two really quick comments on insurance that have been alluded to that I think, because you also asked me what are the important provisions of a contract. Getting a certificate of insurance from your contractor means nothing. Saying I've got this certificate, saying you've got insurance doesn't mean anything. What you want from your contractor is to be named as an additional named insured so that you can make claims directly on their policy. We also talked about performance bonds, And some people would indulge the assumption that once I get a performance bond or a payment bond, I'm good to go, I got nothing to worry about. Getting a performance bond is not a substitute for managing the project properly and negotiating the terms properly. I do not like seeing clients pay what are called mobilization expenses. For a concrete restoration project, there really aren't any mobilization expenses. Now, if you're replacing $1 million worth of windows, you've got a lot of material to pay for up front, that's different. Secondly, pay in arrears. In other words, pay the contractor as work is completed after your engineer inspects it to make sure it's in accordance with the specs and approves the draw request for payment. Only at that point. Hold a retainage out of every payment, at least 5 or 10%. So that way, at the end of the day, you still got at least a little bit of leverage to get the contractor to come back and do punch list items. It's important to understand that insurance matters, but getting a certificate of insurance doesn't mean anywhere near the same thing as being a named insured. And having a bond doesn't mean you shouldn't still be very careful and deliberate in terms of how you administer the project and the contract.
So Ken, what happens, let's back to the release of lien. Let's say you have a general contractor and they outsource some of the work, and you pay the general contractor pays the subs, or doesn't pay the subs, and you didn't get a release of lien. What happens to the association? How does that flow through?
Well, Tim, this is what I was alluding to earlier about having to pay twice when you asked me about recording a notice of commencement. If you haven't recorded a notice of commencement, you won't be served with notices to owner, and you won't know who the potential lienors are. You won't know who the suppliers are. You won't know who the subcontractors are, who are the people to whom certain parts of the project are outsourced. The importance of recording the notice of commencement addresses the question you're asking now, because it entitles you to get notice and know who to get releases from or who to get statements of account from. Because if you don't, and you get yourself in the situation you just described, where you've paid in full and there are substantial subcontractor or material claims that haven't been paid by your contractor, they're going to lien your property. And if your contractor has split for Tahiti, you're going to pay twice.
And that's exactly what happens, is you pay twice. So be responsible for those release of liens. It's part of the process and should be done on a regular basis. Go ahead, June.
Your engineer is going to be going through those. I apologize for the way that camera is, guys. I don't think there's lights like that in the room. Your engineer is going to be able to look at those as they go with application for payment. And your contractor, or your agreement has already put in the guidelines that go along with that. Ken, I liked what you said, that we're always paying in arrears. I think that's the way you said it. So whenever we're doing these capital expenditure projects and we're looking at the application for pay, with the exception of mobilization or front money that might have been needed for material, we are paying for work that's been completed. So I think that helps you as a board as you go forward. And we are also looking at retainages. Bruce, we see them at 10% right now. So that any job you start, you hold 10% retainage. And then Bruce, about halfway through that, they begin to want to decrease that to 5%. And Ken, frequently it's left within the contract that you can do it that way. So you need to get a sliding scale of when you're going to release retainage. Another thing you might not have thought about, if we're going to do the work and it's on balconies and it's in a stack, I'm going to give you back that stack of balconies for you to be able to utilize during the rest of the work. But I haven't finished the other stacks. So you end up with a sliding retainage, if that makes sense to you, because you're letting retainage go as you return parcels of that. So there's a very rich stew involved in how the cash flow of the project goes. And I think I want to go back to where Bruce started, when we all started in this team, that you really do need to utilize all of the resources available to you, owners group I'm speaking to. Use the resources available to you. Reach out to your attorneys, reach out to your engineers, reach out to other communities that are experiencing similar work. Ask your manager if they have had management experience on that or have someone that could bring to bear for you. Because what you're entering into is a multi-phased, complex. We've kind of talked to you about the simple projects and insinuated to you that they can go awry. there's just a wealth of technical things. Wouldn't you say our world's gotten more technical, Tim, instead of less technical? And I enjoy technical. So I'm finding that the ways that we need to manage our materials, our applications, our timing, our photo documentation, there's greater expectation of having all of those ducks in a row so that we can turn that over. Also, associations, remember as you get reports and information from your contractor, your engineers, your attorneys, always ask for and maintain copies of those for yourself. Some of my clients ask for the photographs. Maybe not all of the photographs are in my report, but those photographs contractually are yours. So ask and get an abundance of information for yourselves that you're able to go forward with that.
Excellent. So I have a couple, so there's some questions that have come in. So Ken, I'll ask you this question. It's the listener is saying that they have a loan where some people paid up front for a project and some pay monthly. Owners were told they could pass on to new owners. When the CPA saw this several years ago, he said it must be paid at closing. He said they don't believe that there is a payment on closing clause. So many owners are upset. What's the right way to handle that?
Depends upon the payment terms that the board put in place when they adopted the assessment. If they set a due on sale clause, then the balance is due on sale. If they didn't, then the owner should have the option to let the buyer assume the rest of the payment schedule.
Okay, great, thank you. Bruce, Howard in Key Biscayne asked the question. He says, are use of loans common to reduce the impact of costly projects? I guess it gets back to, how do you fund a project? Do you get loans? Do you use money out of reserves? Do you special assess? How do you go about getting money?
I think it all comes down to, look, associations are not for profit. Where is the income coming? It's coming from the residents. If the residents, some communities or residents can write one check and boom, we're done. It also depends on the size of the project and the size of the community. Obviously, if you're dealing with an association with fewer amount of units and the cost of the project is, XYZ, it's going to be a larger check. I've heard associations where, people are on fixed incomes, where, they can't afford to do that. So I think there's a lot of factors here of, how you're going to be able to pay the cost of this project. As I said in the beginning, special assessments, lines of credits, loans. Right now, the banks right now are lending. The rates are pretty low. You're in good shapes of doing that, but everyone is in a hold back. Let's see, our economy and everything of that nature. But then I have communities full force ahead. Let's continue. Let's keep going. We're on a good streak there. So I think all of that has to be put into account, Tim. When you're dealing with the finance, obviously you got to also look at, we're in budget time. So how much could one afford to write checks for? You got your maintenance, you've got special assessment, or you've got something else. So you've got to be very careful in how you are so-called taxing your residents out there for specific projects.
But to the point that Ken made earlier, when you're in a property, you have to maintain the property. It's just like all of us individually. If you work out every day, though, your whole life, you're probably going to stay in good shape. If you do nothing but put bad stuff into your body, you may not look so good in 70 years. A building's no different. If you don't take care of your building, it's going to deteriorate. And so you've got to put money aside for your building. So you can put money into reserves. If you don't do that, you can special assess. If you don't, you get the good fortune that you get Dan involved because there's an insurance claim, you might get insurance money. But those are really the only ways that you can create money. So if you haven't taken care of yourself, meaning you haven't set money aside in reserves, and that happens a lot on the east coast of Florida more so than the west coast of Florida.
Really?
You really need to, you got to pay the piper at some time. Pay me now or pay me later is the mentality. And if you don't have the funds to do it, it doesn't mean your building doesn't need to be fixed. It may just cost the people living there at that time the money, because the folks that moved out 5 years ago or 10 years ago, they enjoyed the property without paying for the repairs. Now someone's got to repay. Now someone's got to pay for it. So I think that's important. Ken, a question from Sandra in Fort Lauderdale said, any recommendation on how to get owner buy-in for lobby renovations? We need 75% approval to make changes.
All right, here's a way to disabuse people of the notion that a no vote means no money. If you're doing a lobby renovation, I'm going to assume that what is there is deteriorated and needs to be replaced. If that is the case, I would go out and price what it would cost to replace what is there with exactly what is there, or something that looks as much as possible like what is there. And then I would get a price for what it would cost to make it look the way you want it to look. And I had this happen once at a community in Palm Beach. The cost to make it look the way it looks right now was, let's just say, $400,000. The cost to modernize it and make it look great was $430,000. So if you vote no, we're going to spend $400,000 and it's going to look just the way it's looked for the last 40 years, or for an extra $30,000, we can make it look like this. You have to disabuse people of the notion that a no vote means we're not going to spend anything. That's how.
Great, thank you. June, a question from Franklin, and I don't know if you ever deal with this, but Franklin's asking, how does the board ensure there are no kickbacks from contractors to board advisors?
Hey,
You're a
Dave,
board advisor. How do you keep out of that mess? I'm sure you get accused of it.
certainly, yes, right? I'm going to go back to pre-qualifying. We're interested in working with professionals. So the level of work that we're going to provide, we're past that. It does happen. You're right, it happens. But the way that you qualify that is through your pre-qualifications. Use your process. Use your process. If they go through pre-qual and they say, yeah, because I know your board president and I gave him a Lincoln last year, it's probably not the guy you want to go to work with. So do your homework on who it is.
Tim, can I add to that?
Sure, absolutely, Bruce.
I see a lot of associations now putting in an anti-kickback statement in there, making their contractors sign an anti-kickback policy, ensuring they're not going to do that. So that's something that I would, talk to Ken and his team about, an anti-kickback policy. We had an association where we had a treasurer that, didn't trust anyone. And every single contractor walking into that association was going to sign their anti-kickback policy and make sure that they weren't going to take anything. So that's another way that you can add to that might be creative to a contract from that. Doesn't mean they're not going to do it, but it's another step that you could take maybe to block something if it does come up.
Ken?
You could adopt a board code of conduct. You can take all the precautions you want. The bottom line is, if someone is that underhanded and they're going to do something that despicable, they're going to figure out a way to avoid accountability, or at least they're going to try to figure out a way to accomplish it. But I have a lot of associations now that are adopting codes of conduct for their board. And I think that a lot of the insurance companies, particularly liability insurance companies, like seeing an association adopt and, if necessary, enforce a code of conduct that regulates the way board members can behave in ways that would otherwise create trouble. But let's face it, if a board member is willing to violate the law and risk criminal prosecution by taking a kickback, they're probably going to violate a code of conduct for the board too.
Okay, and Franklin also asked a question, Ken. What can association do with any excess funds from a project funded with special assessment money, other than return the funds to the owner? Can we add them to reserves?
The statute for condos says that if you levy a special assessment, the money has to be used for the purpose for which it was assessed. However, if at the end of the project there is a surplus left, the association may either return the funds to the owners in their pro rata shares or apply it as a credit against future assessments. I have never seen an association return the funds. Oftentimes, the owner who paid the assessment has sold and left, and you'd be giving the money back to someone who hadn't paid it in the first place. Most associations hold the money, apply it as a credit toward the next project that is almost always coming up. I don't have a real problem with applying it to reserves. I do have some legal concern about doing that, because if the members have voted to waive the funding of reserves, should the board be able to override that and apply money to reserves that the members have voted to zero out? So those are discussions to have with your counsel, but your options under the statute are either to return the money or apply it as a credit against future assessments.
And I think it's a good point that you make, Ken, so that everybody listening understands if Ken owns a unit and he puts $10,000 into special assessment, he sells, moves on, I move into the unit Ken lived in, and that special assessment only took up $8 of the $10,000 and it gets returned, it comes back to me as the owner of that unit, not Ken who actually put the money in.
Absolutely.
Which is kind of fascinating.
Absolutely.
I don't have to chase Ken down and find out where he moved to send the money to him. Tim gets the money instead.
You're not going to be chasing me down.
Yeah. So another question, Ken or Bruce, I don't know, whichever you guys want to handle this one. Two questions, one from Wendy and Michael, one in Bonita Springs, one in Naples, kind of along the same lines. Can you use, storms have caused damage to several trees in their community. Can you pull money out of reserves to replace a certain amount of trees per year instead of increasing HOA fees?
Reserves can only be used for the purposes for which they were set aside. If it's a condo or a co-op, if it's an HOA, the use of reserves would be restricted by whatever their documents say, unless the membership or the developer opted into statutory reserves. But unless you have a reserve dedicated to this purpose, repurposing reserves for this requires a vote of the members. And it's simple. I mean, you ask me, how do we get people to vote in favor of a redecorating project? You say to people, we need to do this with our landscaping. You can either vote yes to let us use reserves, or we'll be levying an assessment to pay for it. Which would you prefer?
Okay, that's a good answer to the question, because you can create your own reserve for landscaping if you choose in your property. And that's what some communities do, especially large HOAs that know they're going to have trees that fall. If you're in a condominium, you don't have a lot of landscaping, you may not consider doing that, but it's not a bad idea for large HOAs.
Tim, I'd like to add something along the lines of taking money and using it for what it's earmarked for. A lot of times we get questions where associations have gotten large recoveries, which leads into a significant project. And the question is that can they use the money from the claim for something other than what they got paid for? And we see a lot of that, and kind of dovetails from a lot of comments that Ken and Bruce have made here with regards to obligations. And certainly we've seen associations take the standpoint that they can pretty much use the money however they see fit. As it relates to insurance, you never can recover for damages twice. So that would be fraud. So as if you use that money for something other than what you got it paid for, you can't then make another claim subsequently for those same damages if more damage were to occur. Let's say a part of the roof from one storm and then another part of the roof got damaged by another storm. But on that first storm, you got paid to replace the entire roof. You can't go back and ask the insurance company to pay you for the other part. It's not going to happen. But I've also been in situations where associations recover more money than it cost them to restore the building, usually due to a lot of value engineering by their engineers and building consultants and whatnot. And they didn't really restore the building back to what it was. I can tell you that I saw a couple of associations get involved in some litigation where unit owners made claims against the association for that additional money. And they were paid it eventually, either through settlement or by order. So obviously check with your counsel, but be careful as to what you do with that money once you get it from your insurance, because you're not going to get it again. And that's really my message.
Ken, I want to go back to the topic that you brought up, and then we're going to wrap up because I know we're getting up on 90 minutes. But you mentioned the term force majeure. So can you talk a bit about that? And is a pandemic considered force majeure, and how has pandemic affected contractors and projects?
I think anything beyond the control of the parties involved is force majeure. A hurricane is force majeure. We never would have thought that civil unrest, would ever be triggered in any of these documents, but maybe. Force majeure means items beyond your control. And as a result, under the contracts that are being written under the pandemic cloud, you need to be mindful of the fact that the contractor may need extensions to the extent his workforce goes down. The association may need extensions to the extent the pandemic ratchets up and we want to cut off access to the property. Or we have people in the building get sick and the contractor doesn't want to come on the property for risk of infection. You have to account for some flexibility for life safety. That's the ultimate requirement, and that's what most communities have done in terms of their own restrictions with regard to access and closing of amenities, which is to accommodate the life safety concerns that this pandemic has created.
Great. Dan, how have you seen the pandemic change insurance, the insurance language?
Well, we haven't seen, well, funny you say that. We've actually started to see policies endorsed with specific exclusions for COVID-19 that didn't exist before. You saw the insurance companies come out almost automatically say, oh, there's no coverage, these aren't covered, and they report these huge quarterly earnings and then slowly recess into, oh my God, these claims are going to cost billions of dollars. We need to raise premiums even higher. To now, you're seeing, unfortunately, adverse decisions out of most courts saying that there's no coverage under business owner policy, commercial policy, which is relevant to associations because a lot of the policy forms that are incorporated into a condo association policy are the same as you would see with some businesses. So it is relevant, and it's something for associations to watch because a lot of decisions will interpret some of the language. And remarkably, even though they claim this stuff's not covered, they're now adding endorsements that specifically exclude viruses and by name COVID-19. So if it wasn't there before, wouldn't you infer that it would be covered? But I think one of the things for an association to take note of is that the way in which we operate, our risk of operating these buildings, whether it's as advisors, a business as a business like KW and property management, what risks and the protocols that you in place now, how do they take, what life do they take on of their own next year, 2021, let's say when the pandemic resolves itself or by vaccine or whatever else, and there's another one on the horizon. Are we going away from these policies and procedures? Are we sticking with them? Because if we go away from them and all of a sudden there's a spike and someone gets sick, are we then responsible for it? We saw dramatic increases in general liability expense and costs. A lot of people will say that it's directly related to the issues of the pandemic. There's a lot of decisions every day coming out with MDL and the various stuff and other type of medical claims that are being made by employees. So I think it's very prudent for all of us to continue to monitoring these things and understand that while they say it's not covered, they're certainly going out of their way now to make sure it's not.
Great, thank you. So one last question for all of you, and you'll all have different perspectives, so I'm very interested what you're going to say about this. In June, I think I'll start with you. So if an association only has a certain amount of money to spend, but you've got more projects than you have money to spend, where should you start to create value for your property? What's going to create the greatest value for a community?
Oh gosh, that's great. So we have $1 to spend and we've got $100 worth of need. We've got to take care of the critical things. I have 2 buildings right now that are under notice by the municipality because the stucco is falling off on its own. That's a problem. And so there may be some needs within that list that have prioritized themselves because you've been noticed, because it's an unsafe situation, because the leakage is so bad. So there's that. The next thing we want to look at you and that where that dollar is going to go is what we can do to protect your own envelope. We don't want you to leave. We've learned that through the years. You can tolerate a lot of things happening in your condo, even your concrete cracking. But leakage is a huge problem, and we're interested in preserving the same investment that the owners have, the future of the structure and their interior. So we're going to look at that with you. And then what we're going to try to do is help you understand that you do have some more emergent needs, whatever those might be, and schedule them accordingly. Some buildings right now we're painting, they need additional work, and we're sort of stabilizing those areas of needing additional work. But the paint work needs to go on because it's been 10 years and it's leaking at every rain. So there's a real mixed bag on it, Tim, but we want to work with the building where its infrastructure is and then help you judiciously spend the money you can to protect your investment until such time as you might preserve or renovate it.
Great.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, June. So Ken, how about you? You probably get asked all kinds of questions just because you're a lawyer, you're supposed to know everything. So, now you're supposed to know, how do I create value for my property? Where would you recommend a board start spending money to create value for their community?
Follow the advice of your engineer. Have the issues that confront your building inspected by a qualified engineer. Have that engineer help you not only identify the needs, but sequence and prioritize them. And as long as you do that, you're good.
All right, thank you. Dan, what you put a lot of buildings back together after storms. You
Yeah.
understand what the condition the buildings happen to be in. What do you think is a place where value gets created?
I think more nowadays, especially with some potential for a rise in delinquencies, we got to be looking at ways, and we got to look for ways to decrease costs. And I think infrastructure is the first place to look for that. And the reason for is that if you look at your budgets and you look at the line items at the top of it, a lot of those are going to be related to insurance. And one sure way to get that cost down is to focus on your infrastructure, and look at the safety, look at the hazards that your building faces, whether it's flooding, slip and falls, whether it's roofs, windows, door openings, and looking at those things and looking at ways in which you can fortify your building in a way to mitigate the potential for loss. And if you can prove to your insurance company that that's what you've done, almost always they will give you some sort of discount and drive that cost down, which will leave more money in your on your budgets or whatever for other things. Also, too, it'll obviously equate to less claims, less losses, less legal fees, less adjusters being on site, less construction expenses, less change orders, all those things. If you're investing those dollars in infrastructure, unfortunately, though, people have become expert investors, if you will, in South Florida, and you see a lot of buying and flipping, those with or without experience. So they're trying to maximize dollars in the short run, and they're not going to share that same vision. But I can assure you that if you have some long-term visionaries on your boards, they're going to see that infrastructure and looking at how to mitigate hazards is going to drive down costs over time, and certainly going to save you money in places where, quite frankly, if you don't have any claims that year, where did that premium dollar go? Went nowhere. So how do we make up for that by investing in things that are going to drive those expenses down?
Great, thank you, Dan. Bruce, what do you see the value creation being?
Tim, I'm going to disagree with everyone that's on the panel because I know my customers a lot better because I deal with them on a day-to-day basis. The first thing that people are going to want to say is, we want to see our value. We want to see everything out there. So they're going to want to see a beautiful lobby. They're going to want to see beautiful landscaping. They're going to want to see all that value that's out there. But we know that what's behind the scenes, those chillers, that concrete and everything, well, that's the infrastructure, and that's the structure that really has to be paid attention to, because nobody pays attention to that. They only pay attention to it when it goes bad, or if you're in the midst of a 40-year or a 50-year certification of something of that nature. So I think that there's a happy medium, and when there's a good board, and when your boards, remember, your boards are people that are amongst your peers. These are your own neighbors that are sitting on this, and they're paying exactly the same fees that you're paying into this. I think there has to be a plan. If you've got a good preventative maintenance plan, if you've got a good reserve study to tell you these things of how to plan this money out and go into things, if you are knowing that you're going into a big 40-year certification or a concrete restoration project, and you've got a good, and I said it before, short, middle, and long-term plan where you could start fixing these things along, I think everybody's going to get what they want. So you're going to get the value out of what I call the eye candy, which is all that stuff that people see, but all those people in the back to make sure that my air conditioner is not going to shut down because my cooling tower is really good, or those leaks are going to stop because we really did the right type of sealing around it. I think there's a happy medium. So that's the decisions that boards are going to have to make. And I think that there's got to be that happy medium along because you're never going to have an entire community agree, well, let's put all our money into all that stuff that we don't see. It just never, ever happens. So those decisions on the board, try to, give a little, take a little bit, from that end. And I'm sure they're going to come up with a great decision.
You mean there's no sex appeal to like a new fire panel?
No, but it depends on if you're a fireman.
Yeah.
When there's sex appeal, when there's a fire in the building, and that's what people
exactly.
that's what people don't understand, Dan. It's when you're wanted the most, it's not there, and that's the problem with the infrastructure. That's the problem with all of these projects. Everyone, we hate to spend our money. You keep saying, "Oh, I'm never going to be around till I'm going to be dead before I see this come back to me." But the bottom line is, you got to take care of your home. And if you're living in a single family home, it's a lot different living in a condominium. And it's a lot different than, when you're living if a roof goes, of course you're going to have to do it if you're in a single family home. So, give a little respect to all those people that's sitting on the board, those people that are giving a lot of time and effort to it. Give a lot of respect to these professionals that they're going to bring in there. And I think that in the long run, most of these projects are going to end up right if you're doing it the right way that we've been talking about for the last hour and a half together.
So my recommendation would be start with a very good preventive maintenance program, adhere to that preventive maintenance program, have reserves. Reserves are important. If you don't, then you have to special assess, but have a project plan, have a plan for what needs to be done in 12 months and 3 years and 5 years and 10 years. You have reserve studies. Reserve studies should be done regularly, serves as your guidepost. A piece of equipment that they say is going to last 10 years probably isn't going to last 20, but could it last 12 or 13? Absolutely. But have the funds available to replace it when the time comes. Otherwise, you have to special assess. So we've come up on an hour and a half. That was my goal, to be finished then. So I very much want to thank our dazzling panel, June Willcott from Willcott Engineering, Ken Direktor from Becker Law, Dan Odess from GlobalPro, and Bruce Masia, my counterpart with KW Property Management. Also special thanks to Beth Rappaport from Brightview for sponsoring the event, and everyone will get their Starbucks card that participated. Thanks to all of our listeners, and over 90% of you hung in there all 90 minutes. So thank you for that. We'll do this again. We look forward to continuing to educate you. We will send out a link that for the recording of this event today. And it also is posted on our website at kwpmc.com. And we have a YouTube channel where we post everything that we do. So thank you, panelists. Thank you, listeners. Thank you all for participating in today's event. And have a great rest of the week.
Yourselves.
Take care, Tim.
Thank you.
Take care, everyone.